The last 32 years it's been, there has been a ban on any new nuclear power projects in the state of Minnesota. The state legislature is at least looking at potentially changing that. $500,000 approved this year with to study the possibility of building some new nuclear sites. And in Sherburne County, they're looking to get back into that nuclear game if that happens. They've got a history of nuclear power going back 60 years, really what was considered the first rural nuclear power plant. And again, now looking at potentially having a new one if it gets approved in what is a shuttering coal plant. Joining us to talk more about that right now is County Commissioner Andrew Hulse. Thank you for joining us today. Is it Hulse or Hulse?
It's Hulse.
Hulse. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate the time here. Let's, before we talk about what you're looking at now, at least exploring now, let's give viewers a little bit more of that history with Sherburne County. And it was some 60 years ago, which was believed to be the first rural nuclear power plant in the nation, a small one.
That's correct. So in the 50s, the Atomic Energy Commission was looking to do some small nuclear power plant demonstrators, and Elk River was selected as a site. They broke ground in 1958. The plant itself came online in 1964, and then was decommissioned in 1968. Ended up running about 22 megawatts is what the net power generation was for that demonstration facility.
Okay. How long did that operate then?
4 years,
Okay.
from 1964 to 1968. At the end of the demonstration, the power plant itself was torn down, and it was later replaced with a trash to energy conversion plant.
Oh, interesting. So now, as we're looking at, again, potentially exploring the end of this new nuclear, a ban in Minnesota. I know there have been talks, proponents across the country. I've heard even energy providers here saying this is something that we need to explore because the technology has changed so much over the decades in terms of the safety and efficacy of nuclear power. What is it that Sherburne County is now exploring?
Well, right now we're starting to help with folks that are trying to just get the ban lifted. So we're a big supporter of the study that's been commissioned by the legislature, and we want to do things right. We want to, if nuclear power is to come back to Minnesota, we want to make sure it's done correctly. But we do think with the move away from fossil fuels, that nuclear is the right area to move us toward toward power generation. One of the challenges that we've got, for example, up in Sherburne County, we have a very large coal-fired power plant. That plant's being shut down, and plants like that drive base load power. And there's a difference between base load power and peak power. So base load power is just the steady state amount of power that you just need every day. Peak load power is what you need, for example, when all the air conditioners are kicking on, like now in the middle of the summer. There are things like solar, which are really good for peak load power, but they're not great for base load power. And so we need to find an alternative source for that baseload power, and we think nuclear is a good opportunity for that.
There's still a lot of pushback on nuclear, a lot of opposition here, people that are concerned about obvious safety concerns when you're dealing with radioactive material, the storage of the radioactive waste, which has to be put in casks and just sort of stay there forever, the worries about leaks. I mean, how do you respond to those? I mean, what are very, very forceful arguments in opposition against?
Yeah, and I think they're very valid concerns, and they're the type of things that need to be addressed by this study as it's put forth by the legislature. But the thing I like to remind people is I'm a former naval officer, and the Navy's been running nuclear power plants for 70 years in pretty significant harsh environments such as aircraft carriers and submarines, and they've been very successful at that. I also remind people that across the country, there are small nuclear power plants operating on campuses across the U.S. So, for example, in the basement of the electrical engineering building at Purdue University, or the mechanical engineering building at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Mm-hmm. And those power plants have been operating for 50, 60, 70 years. So those power plants are out there. and I think what we need to do is get past some of the perceptions. There are safety concerns with nuclear reactors, but we are well past the Generation 1 plants that we're used to seeing in the U.S. And it's an excellent opportunity for us to take a look at moving forward.
Is there any way you can put into kind of layman's terms to describe what has changed in the last 30 years in terms of ensuring the safety of these types of plants?
Well, there's a number of things that have taken place. One is the efficiency of the plants. And I think one of the biggest things is, as we're moving into Gen 3 and Gen 4 reactors, is just how efficient they are at using the fuel, so that there is much, much less waste. And even there's some designs that would consume the waste fuel itself. So, it depends on the generation, Gen 3, 4, 5 reactor, but they are light years different than the first generation of those reactors.
Okay, and lastly, what's the timeline for this? I mean, obviously, this is something where the legislature's approved a study of the possibility, and you guys are trying to get into part of this conversation. What's a timeline for this look like?
Well, realistically, we're decades. You have to get through the study first, and then beyond that, just from the regulatory requirements and commissioning and getting something online, you're talking, at least 10 years. Now, there are some designs, these small modular nuclear reactors, which we think are very interesting, which are designed to be lower cost because they're designed to be built as modules, down to the size perhaps of a tractor trailer. We think some of those are very interesting, and they may be shorter timelines. Some of those demonstrators are being built as we speak in other states, and we would just like to be part of that conversation.
Interesting. Well, we'll keep track of how this goes. And again, it looks, many, many more years of talking about this. But again, a lot of conversations about how people saying that this has to be part of clean energy, with, of course, the concerns about the other elements of this that may not be so clean. But it makes it fascinating. Thanks so much for your time.
All right. Thanks for having me.
All right. Andrew Hulse with the Sherburne County Board. All right.